I guess I'm going to lead with this thought. I feel like there's a lot of stuff going on in people's lives. And God is there. He's with us every minute, every day. Um, but he wants to work through us, for us. And we just, I know my heart anyway, is for this to be home. Whether we're physically here in this building or just when we're together. And for us to be a people, a group that we're not hiding behind we don't want to we don't want to project fake positivity. We want to be able to be open and honest with what's really going on in our lives, and being willing to being a gracious and safe and thoughtful and compassionate people with each other. It's a tricky thing to navigate, to be the first one to be open and vulnerable. So I understand that, and we're, some of us have been here a long time, but we never necessarily opened up to each other in a lot of ways. But I just feel like, well, I know God has more for our connection as a body, as a family. The language he uses is family. It's being in one body. It's sharing life together, and it's not a license to just go around and dump all your stuff on people. That's not what we're saying either, but it's to be a place to be a people, to be a group, to be a family that can come together and be open where we're hurting, and truly be vulnerable, that we can't help each other if we don't know what's actually going on with each other. And being intentional from both sides of that, being intentional to be positive and gracious and encouraging and safe and trustworthy, but also be willing to be honest with where you're at with things and what you're going through, and asking for that in support and encouragement. I feel like God's grace is there for us to do that, because that's what he wants. And it's just, I guess, there isn't like a thing to do. We're not going to pair off and share your deepest secrets or something here. I'm not going to do that to anybody. But just be praying about it. Be evaluate yourself. Am I guarded in this body? And if I am, why? Is it because of who I am, or because of who I think I'm with? And if there's someone you need to work through something with, be willing to do that. But I guess from the receiver side, just be, I guess, graciously inquisitive. Like, don't just be like, hey, how's it going, and keep walking. Be like, how are you? Like, what can I do for you? How can I pray with you? What can we do to, be open to maybe making time for people that you wouldn't necessarily think to make time for. I don't know, I know I hammer on the body thing and all that, but I just feel like there's a push from God, from the Spirit, to push in together. Because, I could be amazing up here, and not that I am. I think the stuff I share is fascinating, and God is great, and there's so much to explore, and that's what I'm trying to get out there, we're all in this together. My delivery obviously could improve, but that's not why we're here. we shouldn't be here because we like the teacher, because otherwise we could just stay home and find a good podcast or a guy on TV or on YouTube or whatever. Like, that's not the point. That's not the way God has us as a church. That's not the point of having a body. So I'm going to do my best, and hopefully the Spirit's in it, but we're here because we're here together. Like, that's the point. So just, I guess, reflect on both sides of whatever side of that you are. Can I be more open? Can I trust somebody and trust God in them? It's not. There's a risk of getting hurt if you expose yourself. There's always going to be, but our trust has to be in Him to carry us through whatever that might be, because there is so much to gain by having that connection. It's so easy to feel alone the way our society is right now. In the midst of people, you can be surrounded by people all day and be completely alone, and that's why we're here, to keep that from being your reality, because God is in us. Therefore, God can flow through us, and we say that as like a nice theory sometimes, but like your connection, your soul to soul, spirit to spirit connection can be all the difference in someone's life. Can give them the strength and courage to face the things that they need to. And life in this world can be hard, and we shouldn't be doing it alone because we're in this together. So that's completely irrelevant to what I was going to talk about today. But I just felt like God's pushing me to share that. So, all right. So we are going to jump in to Hebrews, and this is a fun chapter for me because we get into the slightly less mainstream topic of Melchizedek. So last week we talked about chapters 5 and 6, and it was kind of an aside. The author, the preacher, because we think the way this is formatted, it's more of a sermon than it is of a letter. And, oh, hey guys. So we got to this point where he's like, well, you're dull of hearing. I'm not sure if you can even handle this. And I think because if you take it as like this is a sermon, it feels like maybe the people were drifting off a little bit. Maybe he thought they were losing focus. So he wanted to snap them out of it. Be like, you can't even hear. You can't even handle the basics anymore because you're just not focused anymore. You're not living in pursuit of God anymore. So that whole last time, we just talked about the dull of hearing, and they needed to get back to the base. Well, he didn't want to go back over the basics again, but he kind of was wondering whether they needed to, out of concern for them drifting away. And we discussed the possibility that you can drift away enough where you've made that choice that I'm no longer going to serve God anymore. And that is a bad place to be, and if you're in that place, you are no longer redeemed. There's a potential for losing your connection and submission to God, and that's not the path we want to be on. And this whole letter is, sometimes life is hard, don't drift away, look to Jesus. And why look to Jesus? Because he's better than every other option that there is in this world. And that's what this is laying this out. So keep your focus on him, and that's what we aspire to, because ultimately when we're perfected, we are like him. So that's what we might as well start pushing now and live our life as close to being like him as we can. So that's our path that we're on. And at the tail end of chapter 6, I didn't touch on it a whole lot, but he talks about there's two unchangeable things. There's the promise and the oath from God that our faith is in. And the promise is the word, Christ. And this oath is the covenant that we made with him. So God makes this. There's at least, I would say probably nowadays too, that if you want to affirm that you are absolutely speaking the truth, even today, you make an oath. It's like If someone says like on my kid's grave, or something like when they really like invoke something really serious, then they're doing it to invite trust. So God himself said, I'm going to make an oath to I am so serious about this, and that's Jesus, that's the covenant, the blood covenant of Jesus. Because this is so important to him that we get this and we understand it. It wasn't just, even God, who says, let your yes be yes, your no be no. Even God invoked an oath here to verify this is his truth for us. So we're going to get into that a little bit. But, I guess bring up the first. All right, so we'll just read the first few verses here to kind of get into this. What do I have through verse 3? Okay. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him. And to him Abraham apportioned a tenth of everything. He is first, by translation of his name, king of righteousness, and he is also king of Salem, that is, king of peace. He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God. He continues a priest forever. So we're introduced to this Melchizedek character, and he's not mentioned much. He doesn't have a whole lot of screen time in the Bible. He's basically in chapter 14 of Genesis and briefly mentioned in Psalm 110. Do you remember anything about Psalm 110? It's kind of like the outline we talked about of Hebrews. A lot of this is kind of, a lot of the basis, the framework for Hebrews is discussing Psalm 110. So we'll jump back into that. It'll come up again. It's come up a few times. Psalm 110 is the most quoted Old Testament passage in the New Testament too. People bring that up a lot. My throat is dry today for some reason. So let's talk about Melchizedek for a little bit. So the main story is in Genesis 14. Some of you may be familiar with it, and some of you may not. So we have Abraham and his nephew, Lot. Yes, I'm right. It sounded wrong for some reason when I said it. So Abraham lives in Babylon, basically, or the Chaldees, that area. God tells him to set off, find new land, so he ends up in Canaan. Lot and him are blessed by God so much that they need to separate because they can't support all their flocks together in one place. So they kind of look over the land, and Abraham gives Lot first choice. He picks the Jordan Valley, which is obviously the Jordan River there. So there's stuff grows well. It's a nice land. There's cities along there. So Lot likes the look of that and goes that way. And then Abraham takes the highlands more. So there are a lot of, they call them, they're more like a city-state. It's a city, but it's a sort of a nation too. There's a lot of these all over the place. There's not nearly as many people as there are now, and there isn't these unified governments for the most part. So there's a whole bunch of cities that are basically run by a small king for the most part. And so as time goes on, Lot creeps closer and closer to the city, Sodom. I think you've all heard of the name Sodom. So this is the area he ends up in. Okay, do I have a map next? Which one do I have next? I'm trying to remember. All right, so in Genesis 14, we start reading, and there is this king, Chedorlaomer, who is from Elam. He's the Elamite kingdom. So on the bottom right, that's his area. He's amassing power. So I don't know if you can tell by the scale. So the little purple down there, that's basically the Dead Sea. So Israel's about from when you see Zoar to the top of the word, Jordan maybe a little bit higher. Israel's just there. So this is like that's the Mediterranean Sea there. We got like the Sinai Peninsula are there, and the Arab Peninsula down here and all that. Desert. So the Tigris Euphrates, and we see, so I should have brought a laser pointer, but. So, Chedorlaomer is kind of the biggest ruler in the area. He's kind of dominating the region. He has influence all the way over into Israel. So, these small kings, the Sodom, Gomorrah, Zeboim, Admah, and Zoar rulers, the rulers of those cities over in the Israel area, the Palestine area, Jordan Valley, they don't like being ruled. They're going to put up a fight. They're going to get up together. As you can see, like as the scale, these guys are not big-time kings. So Chedorlaomer doesn't like that. So he gathers up a team of him and 3 other kings. And so we have, we'll see, Amraphel, king of Shinar. Shinar is basically the Hebrew word for Schumer. Yes, Schumer actually, I think you pronounce it. So that he's somewhere in that area. A lot of these cities, you'll see a map sometimes and it's like, this is exactly where that city is. And a lot of times we're kind of guessing. Sometimes it's actually been excavated and verified, and sometimes we're guessing a little bit as to exactly where things are. But for the most part, we'll take this map as close enough for what we're talking about. And then we got Arioch, king of Elasar. Elasar is Larsa, which you see under the word Sumer is Larsa, so this is a king from right there. And then we got Tidal, king of Goyim. The word Goyim means nations. This guy's the least clear as to where he actually rules over. It could be, because it says nations, like a coalition. It could be like he has a whole bunch of little cities under him somewhere in the region. Or some people think that because that name is a really Tidal is a common Hittite name. That's why this map has that whole Hittite thing highlighted over there, because potentially he's a Hittite king too. So either way, he's got a group coming with him. So we got these 4 powerful kings against these 5 little guys that are up against him. So a lot of times we like the underdog story. I think that's a cultural thing. Actually, I might as well just jump into that. The whole the underdog story is an interesting concept to get into. I'm going to ramble today. It's fun, and I think it helps us get better picture of some of the details and why things are the way they are. So we know the truth of God. God Almighty is the King. He created the world. When you look back in all these, what's the word? All these pagan, they have all these gods and everything. There's basically no culture that has one omnipotent creator God. There is no other, no one. They're all like collections of gods, and they all have different tiers and powers and all that. So the interesting thing is I gotta pull back a little bit more. So we got God, created the world, everything. Then I've talked multiple times about the whole Babel incident, where the Tower of Babel, they build the Tower of Babel. They're trying to come to God in their own way. They're trying to manipulate God by building this tower, and that's the whole idea that's going on there. And God sees that this needs to be broken up. They need to understand they only come to God his way. And so he separates the nations. He divides them up. He takes the nation under Abraham, his line. They're going to be his people. The world's going to see how good God is by how he interacts with his nation. And then the rest of the world is divided up, and they say other tongues, but each one is kind of given their area. Angel's not really the right word, but sometimes we use it. There are created beings. God has made other beings in his image. These are the spirits and the powers and principalities and all these things we read of in the Bible. So this sounds a little odd, but if you're not familiar with this concept, but it's basically the nations are assigned under these other gods. And then it seems that a lot of them turn because they take the worship to themselves instead of glorifying God. And so there's fallen spirits, and that's how we get the powers and principalities and stuff like that. I'm going over a whole lot of trying to stay high level so we can kind of get all understanding this on the same level. So anyway, where I was headed was the idea of this underdog story actually comes from it's a demonically influenced story because almost every culture, the second god, the under god, ends up being the one that gets to be in charge. If you know like Greek and Roman god stuff, like Kronos was the big god, and then Zeus, he had a bunch of kids, and Zeus tricks him and ends up conquering him, and Zeus ends up the ruler. And if you know the Baal story, there's El is the main high god, and then but then Baal ends up taking over, and he ends up being the new ruler, and that's who the people worship. And so this story, over and over and over again, we hear the second guy, the weak, the underdog, the son, usurps the main god and ends up the ruler. Almost every story, except ours, that's the story. And I think that's a demonically influenced story. I think that's Satan's ploy to make that the accepted normal. You don't want to submit and honor God. You know better, and you can turn over. I don't know. That's an aside. That was an even extra thing that isn't even in my notes. So anyway, I forgot how I jumped onto that, but anyway. So we have the underdog story, because these are the underdog guys, and we think you'd want them to win, but actually we know Sodom. It doesn't end up well. Sodom and Gomorrah doesn't end up well. We're not going to get into that. There is, again, lots of big story things. There is also, in Genesis, it's 7, there's the line where the sons of God, basically spirit beings, produce offspring with humans before the flood. I think it's 7. And again, the offspring of that we know of as these giants. This is where you get Goliath down the line and other things. And the offspring, any people that are associated with this giant concept are the ones that get wiped out, that God tells them to wipe out. And because they are, if you really look into the practices of how they worshipped at the time, it's like child sacrifice, cannibalism, like invoking spirits with the king and the temple prostitute to produce offspring. It's as bad as people get. And that's the stuff that's going on before Noah. Like, that's the stuff that's the bad, like, that's why this has to be wiped out, because it's contaminating the whole earth. We have to get rid of this concept. And anytime you hear a giant clan reference, it ties all that imagery in it together. So, that's relevant because Sodom and Gomorrah and those places seem to be connected to a lot of these giant clans. These giants settle in the Palestine area, Israel. So go to the next map for me. So we read, on their way in, the four big nations, Kedorlaomer and his crew, come through and they destroy all these other ones before they get to the Sodom and Gomorrah and those kings. Every one of these, the red ones, the Rephaim, the Zuzim, the Emim, Horites, Amalekites, Amorites, all giant clans, all nasty, bad, worst thing we got to get rid of. So God is using these people, even though they aren't necessarily godly people, to wipe this out. These are the ones that Joshua has to completely clear out of the land. These are the things that have to be eliminated. These are the ones, the Amalekites are particularly bad. They're the ones that attack Israel just after coming across the Red Sea, and they are a problem from the beginning. They're out of the grandson of Esau's line, but they're contaminated with this giant clan stuff, this really nasty religious worship stuff. But they're all these. When Saul is supposed to wipe out, I believe that's Amalekites too. Right? Is that Og? Yeah. And then he keeps some of the stuff, some of the loot for himself, and then he's like, oh, I was going to sacrifice it, and Samuel comes, oh, what's this bleating of sheep I hear? And then he ends up killing the king. That's one of those giant clan people. They were supposed to be completely eliminated to get rid of that contamination. Like, this is, anytime you see like utter wiping out of people, that's what's behind it in the Old Testament stuff. It's not just God being this evil, vindictive guy. It's God trying to protect the world from this level of evil. So anyway, these people come, these nations, Kedorlaomer, come down, and they wipe out a whole bunch of the giant clans for the most part on the way, which is good, actually. It's an interesting contrast. I haven't come across someone explaining why, but it's because the way this all plays out. But anyway, they get to the battle of the 9 kings. We got 4 against 5, 4 big ones, 5 little ones. I've seen Sodom and Gomorrah more where the Zeboim and Admah down in the lower part. I'm not sure why they put them up there. But again, it's one of those, we're not exactly sure where these things are. You got to make your best guess. They fight. They take them all out. They take all their stuff, and they take most of their people and haul them away. Who's living near in Sodom? Lot. Abraham hears about this the next day. Abraham gathers up like 300 guys from his family. He's like 80 years old. He's not this kindly little grandpa guy that we see in the children coloring books sometimes. He's going after the 4 big. We saw the earlier map. These are not like one guy with 50 guys kind of marching through, trying to hit and run. This is real army stuff for the time. They go in, they make a night attack, and wipe them out. And there's some archaeology that indicates this actually happened, and some of these guys rose and fell. It's interesting stuff. So Abraham captures him, gets all the loot back, says they wiped them out, and they flee home. So obviously we can see some clue as to, because we read the stuff about Abraham and how he's like lying about, well, not being fully true that Sarah is his wife because he's scared that they're going to take her, and he comes off as kind of a not full of faith guy, even though he's said to be. But then you read this kind of thing and you realize he had more backbone than he comes off in sometimes, because I don't know that I would have been comfortable doing that myself. But he trusts God ultimately in the end, and God takes care of them. So Abraham hauls stuff back, comes back to the king of Sodom, and Sodom's like basically like a finder's fee. Here you can have stuff, and you can have a bunch of this stuff. And Abraham says, the guys that came with me, they ate some of it. Let them have that. I don't want any of this. I don't want, Abraham does not respect the king of Sodom. And he shouldn't, because obviously we see within a few years, it's got to happen where the Sodom and Gomorrah thing happens. Plus, they're in bed with these other giant clans. There's mixing going on there. Abraham doesn't want to touch any of this stuff for himself, and doesn't want it to be seen as any way that his path of God blessing him. But I guess let's read the actual Melchizedek part. So, for kings, future king, told Abraham. Sorry, I it was. And Abraham returned from defeating Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him. I am in Genesis 14, verse 17. So after he returned from defeating Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet Abram in the valley of Shavah, known as the King's Valley. Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out the bread and wine. Now he's the priest of the Most High God. He blessed Abram, saying, Blessed be Abram by the Most High God, creator of heaven and earth. Worthy of praise is the Most High God, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Abram gave Melchizedek a tenth of everything. And that's it on Melchizedek. But it says, Then the king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me the people, take the possessions for yourself. That's why the king of Sodom was like, Take all the stuff, I'll have my people back. But then Abram replied, I raise my hand to the Lord. I won't take anything from you, not even a thread of strap of sandal. Okay, so this is where he declines everything. So that's Melchizedek. That's like the extent of how much we have of him referenced. And so it's interesting that he gets brought up again in Hebrews, like as this crucial point about Jesus. So we'll get going into his name. The name Melchizedek means my king is Zedek. And Zedek is it's not exactly just another name. I guess the word hypostasis is this word, where gods can be in different forms, was like the pagan belief a lot of time. And it's a word that we use for the Trinity, like the different persons of the Trinity, but that's not exactly what we're talking about here. But so in the pagan concept, there can be a god. Like if you make an idol, the god is in the idol. If the king at the time, who is under the nation that submits to this god, the king is also the god at the time. Like he's carrying that. Wherever the temple is, that the god is there. So like there's different, the same god can be in different forms everywhere, all these places at the same time. And so the god that we're talking about here is the god Shemesh, which is a sun god. And he was worshipped in this area. So Salem is a specific place. Does anyone have any guesses where that actually is? It plays out later. It's actually in the name. Jerusalem. So Jerusalem. So this is where Melchizedek was the king at the time. He was a priest king, which we'll get into a little bit too. So you hear this story, and there's so many layers of things. I'll have to stop at some point. Obviously, we're not going to get through all this, but when you hear this, the way the Bible's written, a lot of times it's telling very similar stories or talking about things that the area would know, but it tells the truth about them. The Bible tells a creation story. There were other creation stories, but it's telling you the truth, and the way it's saying it, a lot of times it's repudiating other stories. It's this term called polemic. When the flood story, there's lots of flood stories, because we believe there actually was a flood, but the way that the flood story is told, it's specifically contradicting some of the other flood stories that were going on at the time. There's that kind of stuff going on. So you're telling this, you're seeing the story, and you see this guy come out, and his name is My King is Zedek. His name is My King is the sun god of Salem. And you're like, well, he's going to be a pagan. But no, it turns out he worships the God Most High. And Abram recognizes they both serve the same God. And so we've talked about Babel, how the world was divided amongst two of these gods. That's true as a nation, but there is always This remnant concept we hear after Elijah defeats the prophets of Baal, and they all get killed, but then he still runs off and he hides, and he thinks, and because Jezebel's chasing him, and he's all depressed, and God's like, what's going on? He's like, I'm the only one left to serve you. And God's like, no, there's 7,000. I kept 7,000 people. There's always a remnant that will serve me, sorry. So in the midst of these nations being divided up, there were still people that knew the one true God and had a relationship. And so despite his parents naming him, my king is the sun god, he still worshiped Yahweh, the true God. And they saw that within each other, their spirits connected, and however they recognized that within each other. So Melchizedek, in the story, you'd think he's going to be the pagan, but he's not. So there's a lot of those kind of like twists and turns. It's the way Jesus tells stories a lot of times too. Like when he's telling the Good Samaritan story. You get to that third guy, and they would expected that to be a Pharisee or something. And he's like, a Samaritan, and they're like, oh crap, because he thought he was going to be the good guy in the story, and there's not. A lot of that kind of stuff going on in the Bible. So, you expect him to be a pagan? He's not. Turns out he's a good guy. And this Shemeth God, unfortunately, actually is pervasive in moving down the line. This Salem is Jerusalem. The Jebusites live there until David conquers them and makes Jerusalem the city of God, his capital city. And then David wants to build a temple, doesn't get to build a temple, lets Solomon build a temple. Solomon has all this wealth, builds all these great things, but takes in all these wives. He's influenced by these wives because they worship a lot of these local gods. If you read, I didn't have that verse. If you read some of in 1 Kings, when Solomon's building, it talks about him going for these wives and building some of these idols and temples for the other gods. And then when you get to Josiah in 2 Kings 23, Josiah is one of the few good kings. Sorry. So when we read about Josiah in 2 Kings 23:11, it says, "And he removed the horses that the kings of Judah had dedicated to the sun at the entrance of the house of the Lord by the chamber of Nathan-Melech the chamberlain, which was in the precincts, and he burned the chariots of the sun with fire." So from the beginning, from Solomon building Jerusalem up to this great thing, there has been at the temple a statue to this Shemesh sun god that took, I think, a couple hundred years till Josiah came through and wiped that and eliminated that. Like, this god's influence has been there that whole time, which is sad, because we hear good things about Solomon being wise and all that, but he made some mistakes. But Israel, it was a struggle for Israel to be true to God the whole time. We know that. But anyway, yeah. So let's keep going. So it says Melchizedek is a priest of the God Most High, the one true God. I covered some of that, so let's keep moving. He is the first priest mentioned in the Bible, and he's also the first positive king figure in the Bible. Before this, we've gotten like Nimrod, the mighty hunter, and a lot of that is along that the giant clan line through the genealogies. When you hear like drawing a blank on the Hebrew word, but there's a word here, but basically it's a great men, the great men of old, and you'll hear that language, and they're looking back to their forerunners a lot of times, when in a non-godly context. A lot of times you're looking back to these great men, and again, I believe that's demonic influence on the storytelling, where we're idolizing these monstrous people from the past. And this knowledge, a lot of times it's tied with the flood stuff, like all this like great knowledge must have been lost with the flood, and a lot of that's tied to these evil giant clan people. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes in these stories that's worth getting into anyway, and it fills out a lot of these stories as we talk about them. So he is a priest king. And so that in itself is an interesting concept, because I believe that was probably God's ideal for his people as well, up to that point. And because we get Moses, when he's called by God, at first he just calls Moses, and then Moses is like, I don't know, I don't speak well, I can't do it, and God's like, come on, you can do it, I'll be with you, here's a staff, I'll turn into a snake, he's giving him proof, but in the end he's just like, can you please send somebody else? And so God says, well, Aaron can talk good, he's already on his way, I already planned for this because I knew what you were going to do, and so Moses defaults on being both the governmental and spiritual leader of the nation, and it gets split into a priesthood and a kingship, essentially, is how it functions. That Moses is essentially the governmental leader, and Aaron ends up being the spiritual leader, doing all that. So the idea is that Jesus is going to bring these back together ultimately. That's what we're looking towards as the ultimate concept. And as we read in, I'll just look quick to bring this together. We're not going to cover much in actual Hebrews here. I think this is going to be all set up. So I'm going to pull up Psalm 110, and if we read, it's verse 1, yeah. The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. That's Psalm 110:1. That verse gets brought up when Jesus is talking to the Pharisees about he's just like, you're going to ask me a question, I'm going to ask you a question, then I'll answer your question. And he says, how does David call the Messiah his Lord? And they can't answer it. The truth is that that's a sign that David recognized that the Messiah was going to be a divine figure. He isn't just going to be a man, he's going to be God. And that's the only way that David's descendant, who comes way after him, would be his own Lord, is if he's actually God. That's the only way that works. So we're looking ahead. So because they had Psalm 110 before Jesus came, the readers of the Old Testament the Hebrews had grown to understand that when Messiah came, he was going to be a divine figure. They got that concept, and that was through tying him to Melchizedek. Because of Psalm 110, which actually I guess I should read the part that references Melchizedek in Psalm 110. It's verse 4. It says, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So Psalm 110 is about the coming Messiah. And this is where the only other reference to Melchizedek we get before Hebrews. There's 3 references to Melchizedek. It's Genesis, the actual story of the Battle of the Nine Kings. It's Psalm 110, which is prophetic about the Messiah. And it's the writer of Hebrews coming back and explaining this to us, how Jesus fits into that picture. So all this ties together. So probably don't need to get that. So the priesthood, I guess the way we're going, we'll go with this. So the priesthood needed to be restored because I don't know that we understand what was going on exactly with the priesthood at the time of Jesus. So again, this is lots of setup. But the Israelites, the kingdom of Israel gets taken away by Assyria, never comes back. The kingdom of Judah gets taken away by Babylon, conquered by Persia. Cyrus lets them come back, they rebuild the temple. They rebuild their walls, they become a nation again. This is where the start of the second temple, we call it, because the Babylon had destroyed the first one. This temple by Ezra is where they worship for a while until someone comes through and wipes out a whole bunch of people. Conquers the world. His name is Alexander. We call him Alexander the Great. Not really great, but whatever. So Alexander comes through and conquers Israel. So until that time, they had been a nation again, and so he comes through around 330 BC. So like 300 years before Jesus, a little more than that. He dies young. The Greek world, the world he conquered gets divided up between a few generals. The Ptolemy is one of them, one of his generals, and so they get Egypt, and so they're kind of dominant over the area for a while. They rule Syria, Israel, and then the Seleucids, who are like more like Syria, they basically kind of swap ownership of Israel over that time, until this guy calls Antiochus IV, not a good guy. He comes in he wants to establish his heavy-handed rule, and he comes and sacrifices a pig on the altar of the temple to Zeus. That's not good, if you know anything about it. And this contaminates the temple. So the temple is unusable, they think, and well, it is unusable until this can be remedied. So this is where we get the Maccabees. Ever heard of the Maccabees? Maccabean Revolt. These are Jewish priests. They rebel, and in 165, they take the city back. This is what Hanukkah is about, if you ever wondered that. And so they take it back over. Oh, when Ezra rebuilt the temple, they went back to the Levites and made them the priests. The actual, they knew the people from their actual genealogies. Zadok, who was the high priest under David and Solomon, is actually his line is the high priest line, and everyone knows that. So that's what they were under until this whole contamination, reconquering, all that stuff happens. The Maccabeans come in, free the nation. They're a nation again. They cleanse the temple so they can start using it again. But they're in charge because they're the ones that conquered. They are not Levites. They're not in that tribe at all, but they are the ones that take over. So they make themselves the kings and the priests. So it's no longer the Levite line. There are no longer the priests that run the temple anymore. It's this new, they call themselves the Hasmoneans because that means of Zadok, who is that high priest I mentioned under David and Solomon. Because they know that's supposed to be the line, they call themselves that, but it's not really. It's just a lie, and everyone knows it's a lie, but they're using it to try to validate their being the new ones. So they run everything until Rome comes in around 63, around 60 years before Jesus. Rome conquers and takes over, and they're under Roman rule by the time Jesus comes. This Hasmonean priesthood thing comes to be called the Sadducees. We know the Sadducees from Jesus talking, Pharisees and Sadducees. The Pharisees get kind of a bad reputation because they're like hardcore after God, follow the law as best as they possibly can people. The Sadducees, on the other hand, are kind of awful. They're Jews, but they really like their position. And they're just political, basically. And they make a deal with the Romans that they can be in charge, and as long as they keep the peace. If they keep the peace, they keep their position. And their position works out pretty well because they're corrupt, and they have the permission. Everyone has to collect the Roman taxes, but then they're allowed to have a temple tax, their own tax on top of that. They can charge whatever rate they want, so that rate ends up being pretty high. People can't pay that, so they default. What they have to do is sell their land to the temple. Then the high priest, the Sadducees, who are in charge, let them work their own land for making hardly any money, and the church gets to own the land. So they are basically feudal lords over Israel. They own, I think, 70% of the non-Roman land by the time Jesus comes around. The temple, the Sadducee family does. So they're not the actual line that's supposed to be priests, and they're corrupt and abusing their own people and desperate to keep that power and how they keep that power is by keeping the peace. So that paints a better picture of why they're so opposed to Jesus coming in and disturbing things, for one thing, and why he would come through and flip over the money changers and all that, tables and all that kind of stuff. Again, this is a lot of building out background, filling out the story a lot, to help us understand better, I think. So, how to go? So we read the first 3 verses, and we see that Christ is going to be painted against this Melchizedek figure. A lot of times, not that often, but you will see sometimes that there is the idea that Melchizedek is what you would call a theophany, or Christophany, which means Christ showing up in the Old Testament, which happens sometimes. But if we read the language of the way he's discussed, he's not worshipped directly himself. What was the line? Where was it? Horses. He brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of the Most High God. He blessed Abram, saying, "Blessed be Abram by the Most High God." By God, yeah. By the Most High God, yeah. So, sorry. So he is not, and he doesn't seem to be claiming to be God. Not long after this, God walks up to Abraham's tent and gives him promises and eats a meal with him, and then this is before they go on and tell him he's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah with Lot. So this is not God. This is a man who lived in a time, but he's a type. He's a picture in some way, a shadow of what Jesus is going to be coming. So we don't get his background. We don't get much of anything information-wise on him, so he can be a picture that's used metaphorically for Jesus later. So when it says he has neither father nor mother, we're going to get to that. It's not, he wasn't a spirit. He wasn't magically created. He wasn't just placed on the earth he's actual family. He was flesh and bone born, but metaphorically, we don't know him having a beginning or end. Therefore, if Jesus is in his priesthood, we can metaphorically, he fills the Jesus type, it says. It's not Jesus fills the Melchizedek. I forget the language exactly, but yes, Melchizedek fits the Jesus mold, not the other way around. So I think we're going to have to not actually cover the actual chapter. I think this is a lot of setup for the next chapter, so when we can actually get into it, that'll be better because I think we've got a better picture now for a lot of us for the background of what we're actually talking about. So I guess you guys can come up. So we recognize that the priesthood will need to be restored, especially given the picture I just talked about. But even so, the priesthood was not the answer to begin with. Jesus was going to be the answer. And we know God likes to work through paths that we don't expect, for one thing. And this is all of this stuff is just part of the story of God's pursuit of us. All these interplaying pieces, all these things explain more and more clearly how amazing God is and how he's willing and able to work in and through whoever he needs to and whoever he wants to. And he wants us to be participants in this whole great, amazing story. And I think, like I led off with, I think we shortchange ourselves a little bit on how valuable we are, not just as we relate to him individually. It's not as just the bond we can have with him, which is amazing, but the fact that we are participants, we get to be a part of this story. We get to. Humans broke the plan, and there was no other way for it to be fixed but for a human to fix it. And the priests were not good enough humans, and so God invited himself to come to be a human, to fix it so that we can be part of this. And we all have parts. And it's really hard because I love doing this, and I love sharing with you guys, and hopefully we're growing understanding, and thus, and not so that we can have cool information. And this is a lot of cool information. Well, I think it is, but it's so we can know him better. It's so we can understand who he is and what he's done for us and all that, and we get to be a part. And it's so hard to feel like I'm just saying the words if we're not changing the way we're living life together, if we're not where we need to. I mean, you are good enough. God loves you as you are. There is not a better version of you down the road that God's going to love, but he doesn't love this one now. That's not the way he works. He loved you when he made you. He will always love you and want to be with you and want to live life with you. And I just want to encourage, like, this isn't a chance to just show up here and hopefully feel a little better because you got your time in. Hopefully it's an invitation to, again, it's not that we're not doing enough and we're not good enough, but there's so much more. If we just jump in together with him and take the time to spend the time with him and be open to each other and be open to him speaking into us. And so I'm going to say that probably every time I'm up here in some way or another, but that's the truth. Like I said, it's not. I'm never going to be a good enough teacher that I'm worth coming for. Like, that's not it. It's the information, the understanding of who God is, yes, but it's the relationship with him, with each other, through him that matters, and that's why we're here. And so if we can grow a little bit more in that every day and just open ourselves up to him, like I said, he's there. He's not going anywhere. He's with us always, speaking always. And just be a little more aware of that today and be willing to let him touch us and change us and work through us. So let's worship him together and invite him to Come on in.